Today on Know the Truth with Philip de Courcy, a message from Luke chapter 10.
And remember that the God you're seeking to love and the neighbor you're seeking to help requires a perfect score for a perfect God. See, that's the implication. Don't miss that in the text, okay? You got the law right. Now let me see you do it. Go and do it and live.
What does it truly mean to be a good neighbor? Today on Know the Truth, Philip de Courcy unpacks Jesus' famous parable of the Good Samaritan. We'll discover how this ancient story is more than just a moral tale. It's a powerful mirror that exposes our own hearts. We're learning why true compassion comes at a cost with a lesson titled Like a Good Neighbor. If you missed part 1 of this message, catch up online at ktt.org. Right now, let's join Pastor Philip de Courcy for today's lesson.
Take your Bible and turn to Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. If you're with us for the first time, we're in a series called Famous Short Stories. We're looking at the parables of Jesus. And this morning we're coming to one of the most famous, the parable of the Good Samaritan. So let's come and look at this story. And what I want us to see before we're done today is that it's more than a moral tale. Now, there's 4 things as time allows us. We're going to look at what I call the discussion, the diversion, the depiction, and the declaration. If you want an outline, there it is. First of all, the discussion. Verse 25. During Jesus' discipling of his disciples, a Jewish lawyer, a scribe perhaps, abruptly stands up and asks Jesus a question. He's a lawyer, not in the sense of, dealing with your car accident or your medical claim. He's a religious lawyer who is schooled in the Old Testament, trained in law, theology, and debate. You'll notice that his motives are not clean. And a certain lawyer stood up and tested him. So his motives aren't clean. He's trying to embarrass Jesus. He's trying to trap Jesus. When will men learn? It's a foolish thing to test God on theology. Although before I leave that, I love the fact that his question is the question of questions. Are you asking yourself on a regular basis, how am I going to spend life with God forever? Because the God that created me will someday demand my soul back. And I will have to give an account for how I lived. Let that dominate your thoughts. Get an answer to that question in Jesus Christ before you solve the other questions, because they're kind of irrelevant. Jesus is basically saying, okay, you know the law. That's the right answer. But can you do it? And that brings us to the diversion, because at this point, the lawyer begins to squirm. There's something in Jesus' answer that troubles him. I think he gets what Jesus is getting at. He's put on the back foot. He's now hanging on a hook of his own creation, keeping the law perfectly. So here's what we read, verse 29. But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, who is my neighbor? And he's thinking in the category of non-neighbor. The name of the game is accommodation, because Israelites limited the idea of neighbor to those closest to them, family, friends, community. Didn't include the Gentile, certainly wouldn't include the Samaritan. So when he's asking Jesus, who's my neighbor, he wants the answer that was common in the culture and narrow it down to kind of people I like and people are like me, and maybe I'll get to keeping that part of the law and maybe I'll attain eternal salvation. So that's the second question, who's my neighbor? Look, there's only one way to jump the bar in a high jump. That's, 2 ways. Either jump it or lower it. And it's the same with the law. You're either going to have to keep the law or you're going to have to lower the bar to keep the law. And this guy's lowering the bar. Who's my neighbor? Let's make that manageable. I've got the law right, love God, love my neighbor. I love God because he's perfect in his character, but loving people, that's another thing. I can't love everybody, so let's narrow it down to people I can love. There's an old story about W.C. Fields, the old Hollywood actor. Maybe younger people haven't heard of him. My dad loved watching his movies and introduced me to him, but there's a story. He was kind of agnostic, not a very religious man. And he was once hospitalized, I believe, and a friend came into the hospital to find him on the bed reading a Bible, which was a shocker. And they asked him, well, W.C., what are you doing? To which he replied, I'm looking for loopholes. And that's what this lawyer was doing. He was looking for loopholes. He was looking to make the law manageable because he knew if keeping the law perfectly is the way to attain salvation, I'm sunk. Let's get to the depiction. The depiction. So far, we've had a question, followed by a question, followed by an answer, followed by a question, followed by a non-answer. We're at the non-answer part. Jesus doesn't answer his question, who is my neighbor? He tells a story. Jesus tells him a story to show how far short of loving God and loving others he has come. This masterpiece is a mirror to show him up. Jesus employs a non-neighbor, a Samaritan, to show this man what it is to be a true neighbor. So let's just look at the story, the depiction, the parable quickly. We'll look at the four people involved. What about first one, a certain man, verse 30. Then Jesus answered and said to him, a certain man. This is a typical Jewish traveler traveling south from Jerusalem to Jericho. Jericho, the road to Jericho was a serpentine road. It had narrow passages. It was 17 miles long, and it dropped 3,400 feet from Jerusalem down to Jericho. I always read about going down to Jericho. That means it dropped 200 feet every mile. It was notoriously dangerous. In fact, some called it the bloody way or the way of blood. It was ideal for thieves and bandits to ambush an unsuspecting traveler. And this man was ambushed, right? They stripped him of his clothes, they wounded him, and they departed. What a sad, leaving him half dead. The implication seems to be he resisted. He put up a fight. And he got beat down by a mob. We've seen depictions of this, sadly, haven't we? In New York subways and all around our cities, and it's grievous. It's grievous to watch that kind of scene where a mob just violently beats a man half to death. So that's the first character, a certain man. The second character is a priest. Verse 31. Now, by chance, a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. How sad is that? See, Jericho had within its city limits a community of priests and Levites. It was known as the city of 1,000 palms, a bit like Palm Springs. And priests worked out of there in rotation, which usually meant that they served one full week in Jerusalem twice a year, among other things. And it would seem that he's done his week, and he's coming back down to Jerusalem. His rotation is over. And he's a spiritual icon. And yet he passes by on the other side. He doesn't want to get involved. He professes love for God, but it didn't show up in loving his neighbor. Because those two things go together like a horse and carriage. You love God, you'll love your neighbor. Because the God you love loves your neighbor. He loves the world. Sad, isn't it? What's the explanation? We're not sure. Spurgeon said, I never knew a man refused to help the poor who failed to give at least one admirable excuse. And this guy probably had some admirable excuses. I'll run down them quickly. Fear. If I hang around and fix this guy, I might get jumped by the thieves. Not willing to take that risk. Defilement. He didn't go close enough to realize that the man was not dead. He was half dead, but he assumed maybe he was dead. And according to Jewish law, He couldn't touch a dead body or he'd be defiled and have to go back to Jerusalem. That's a complication. That's an interruption. Just, it's not for me. Here's another one. I'm in a hurry. Want to get home. Or another one, I've done my part. I think there's a guy coming behind me. I can see in the distance, maybe he doesn't know it's a Levite, but hey, there's a guy coming behind me. He'll fix it. He'll help him. He maybe thinks about, as we've said, the inconvenience, the financial costs. Or maybe, you know what? Even for a priest, he may be thinking, oh, well, he probably deserved what he got. I don't need to get involved. Isn't that staggering? Think about all those excuses, guys. We'll come back to this before we're done. Are they excuses that you and I make when God wants us to be the Good Samaritan, helping someone by the side of life's road? In his book, When the Angels Were Silent, Max Lucado tells a kind of mind-boggling story of a man called Paul Lewitz, who had a bad fall at a work site. He punctured his lung, broke ribs, had internal bruising. He lay in an emergency room in a San Antonio hospital in Texas, barely conscious. He probably thought things couldn't go any worse, but they did, because he looked up from his hospital bed and two doctors were getting into a heated argument as to who was going to put the tube into his crushed chest. It got so heated that they started shoving each other. And one threatened to bring security and arrest the other doctor. The poor soul looked up and he said, please, somebody save my life. The two doctors were arguing over a procedure. And while they were debating over a procedure, another physician assumed responsibility and he saved Paul's life. It's kind of hard to believe that, isn't it? But in some ways, the priest is kind of like that. It's too complicated. It's too much inconvenience. I'm not going to get involved. You know what? There's a procedure. I can't touch dead bodies, so I'll just leave them there. That's law triumphing love, ceremony triumphing charity. Then we've got a Levite, verse 32. Levite was an assistant to a priest. They too lived in Jericho. They were from the tribe of Levi, not from Aaron's family. He goes one step further, right? If you look at our text, he at least goes over and looks. The priest didn't even look, just stayed on the other side of the road. This guy goes over and looks. Give him some credit, but not for long, because then he just says, okay, I don't want to get involved. Perhaps he rationalized like the priest. Didn't stop because there was reasons not to stop. Hey, maybe, we'll add one more to that list. Maybe he had compassion fatigue. That's a reality, isn't it? There is so much suffering in the world, so much hurt. Sometimes you don't know where to start. So just, hey, I can only do so much, and somebody's going to have to help this guy. I'm kind of done helping people. I'm a bit kind of wiped out about that. I don't know. But here's the striking thing about the priest and the Levite. Don't miss this, guys, as we move on. It wasn't what they did so much as what they didn't do that the text condemns them. The thieves committed the sin of commission. What did the thieves do? They actively hurt someone violently, lawlessly. That's a sin. That's the sin of commission, when you do what you're not meant to do. But hold on a minute. The priest and the Levite committed the sin of omission. You say, Pastor, what's the sin of omission? Well, that's not doing what you ought to do. See, we tend to fall into this trap. I haven't harmed anybody. Great. I haven't beat anybody up recently. Great. I haven't robbed anybody recently. Great. But who have you helped? Or there are people who have crossed your path and my path day by day, and God has sent them our way to help them, and we didn't. And we don't. That's a sin. James tells us, doesn't he, in James 4, verse 17, for him to know to do good and not to do it, that's sin. Like the story of the teacher who asked the little boy, or the group of boys at Sunday school, he said, sins of commission. are sins we actually do. Now, does anybody in the class know what sins of omission are? And the little fella says, are those the sins we want to do, but we never got round to doing? No, that's not the sin of omission. The sin of omission is knowing what is right to do and not doing it. And that seems to be their sin, the sin of the priest and the Levite. And by the way, as we get to the Samaritan, I think the incorporation of Jesus, the incorporation of the priest and the Levite in this story by Jesus is an implied condemnation of Judaism of that day. I mean, here's the religious establishment and they're failing on all fronts. Here they are quoting the Shema. Here they are professing their love for the law, but they're not loving their neighbor. That's left to the Samaritan, the last person you would think. Because don't you know this as you read the Gospels, it was the religious folks that give Jesus the most trouble. It was the priests, not the prostitutes. And they would ultimately kill him out of envy. And Jesus is exposing him like he does without mercy in Matthew 23. They had 2 bites at the apple and they failed. The priest failed and the Levite failed. Brings us to a Samaritan, a certain man, a priest, a Levite, finally a Samaritan. Then we'll make a few applications. Nobody was ready for this. This is the sting in the tail. Jesus introduces the hero. And the amazing thing is, the guy in the balcony is a Samaritan. You've got to understand the shock factor. In fact, many commentators anticipate, you know what? There'll be enough Jews who are a little put off by the religious clergy. They're not bothered that Jesus kind of takes a swipe at the priest and the Levite. Here's what they're waiting for. They're waiting for the hero to be just a good, solid Jewish layman. They'd take that. But it's not. It's a Samaritan. Now, you need to, we call this the parable of the Good Samaritan. If that phrase had been used in Jesus' day, that would have been an oxymoron. That's like saying a good terrorist, a good Nazi. That's how that falls in the Jewish ear. That's how shocking this is. The good guy is the bad guy. This explodes on their consciousness like a bomb going off. Because remember, they viewed their neighbor as those closest to them, those like them. The Samaritans were half-breeds. They intermarried Gentiles, settled in the land after the Assyrian deportation of 722 BC. They had their own religious system. That's John 4, isn't it? They had their own temple, their own Pentateuch. For the Jew, they were the scum of the earth. For the Jew, they were a manure pile in God's creation. In fact, Samaritans were publicly cursed in the Jewish synagogues, and a prayer was offered daily to God that the Samaritans might not be partakers of eternal life. The only good Samaritan was a dead Samaritan. So that's where we're at in the story. This guy did the opposite of the other two. Did you notice that? He came near, and when he saw what he saw, he was moved emotionally to compassion. But his love was more than a feeling. That morphed into action. He inconvenienced himself by taking time to take care of this man, put some, oil and bandages on him and wine. He put him on his donkey probably and took him to the nearest Motel 6, and he hits the bell and the proprietor comes out and he says, you know what, this guy needs a room, and here's what you need for a night or two. And I'm going to have to leave him, I think, but I'll be back in a couple of days, and if the bill extends beyond that, I'll take care of it. That's where we're at. True compassion. This deserves more treatment than I'm giving it. What is true compassion? Closeness, compassion, care, cost. Just look at all the elements. This man became a real person because he took time to get to know him and understand his situation. It's easy to love people at a distance. It's easy to love your neighbor as a category. It's different when life puts a face on him and it's a face you don't like. Closeness, compassion. He was moved. His heart was moved. His heart was heavy. His soul was engaged. A tear welled into the corner of his eye. This man was a man made in the image of God, now scarred by poverty and violence. And that moved him to action where he cared, and the care cost. Guys, that's true compassion. The thieves said, what's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. The priest and the Levite said, what's mine is mine, I'm going to keep it. The Samaritan said, what's mine is yours, I'm going to give it. That's what true compassion is. Compassion comes at a cost, with inconvenience. You may have heard the story of the man who wasn't doing too well physically, and so he went to his doctor, and the doctor carefully examined him and said, you know what, I'm going to have to share something with you or with your wife. He calls the wife in, and the husband goes out, and the guy says, you know, your husband's suffering from a very rare form of anemia. And without treatment over time here in the near future, he could get really sick and it would threaten his life. But the good news is there's treatment. He's going to need nutrition and a clean environment. And he said, I'd recommend to you as his wife that, you get up early and cook him a good solid breakfast, maybe some oatmeal or maybe a couple of rashers of bacon and an egg. At lunchtime, give him a home-cooked meal, and certainly at night, give him something old-fashioned like some meat and potatoes. That really would be good. And you could always throw in some, cakes, pies, and homemade bread. And beyond that, given his immunity issue, he's going to need a clean environment. So you're going to have to, keep the house spick and span, do a bunch of hoovering and cleaning. And if you'll do that, I think he stands a good chance of surviving. So she goes out into the examination room. The husband says, well, it's bad, isn't it? And she says, it is. He says, what is it? She says, you're going to die. Now, I think you knew that was coming. But it's a kind of funny, light story about something very heavy and real. But you know what? We're happy for people to hurt, happy for people to die. Sometimes because we just don't want to get involved. The cost is too much, the inconvenience of it all.
You're listening to Know the Truth with Philip de Courcy, and a message titled Like a Good Neighbor. To hear it again, visit ktt.org or download the KTT app or podcast. Today's message was from our famous short story series, a study that examines Jesus' parables and the timeless truths they reveal for our lives today. It's our hope that these messages help you gain a deeper understanding of Christ's teachings and apply them to your everyday life. So this month, we're offering a resource that will aid you in doing so. It's called The Parables, Understanding What Jesus Meant by Gary Enrig. This exploration of the parables will not only help you see yourself in a new light, but also provide a window into the heart and mind of God Himself. You can request a copy of The Parables by giving a gift of any amount. Call 888-644-8811 or give online at ktt.org. Philip?
Hey, Pastor Philip again. Inviting you to join me October the 7th for the first annual Know the Truth golf tournament and dinner. We are excited. Enjoy a great day of golf, win prizes, and share a time of fellowship on the links and during dinner later in the day. You'll hear from me as I share stories and exciting updates about the Know the Truth ministry. You need to know this. All funds raised from the tournament will support Know the Truth and its work of sharing the gospel with a world in need of truth through the preaching and teaching of God's Word unashamed. I hope to see you and your friends there. You can learn more and register online at ktt.org.
Well, that's all our time for now. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Be sure to join us tomorrow when Philip de Courcy concludes this message titled Like a Good Neighbor. That's Wednesday on Know the Truth. Today's program was produced and sponsored by Know the Truth Incorporated. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."